Hi everyone, good afternoon. Thank you for joining in. I hope I'm audible. Hi Richa.
Hi, yes, I can hear you.
Great. It's 12:01. We will just wait for a couple of minutes for some more people to join in. And then we can begin at 12:05. Does that work? All right. Right. So, welcome again, everyone who took out the time to join us today. My name is Subhashri, and I work with the high school programs, Office of High School Programs at Ashoka University. And we are very, very excited to host our educator dialogues. And this time, something really close to my heart, something that I've worked on in the past, and with someone that I admire a lot. We have Richa Gupta, who is the co-founder of Labhya. Richa, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, absolutely. Firstly, Subhashi, thank you so much for having me, and really grateful to you and the Ashoka team for holding this conversation and holding these spaces. They're extremely important. My name is Richa. I'm a teacher turned entrepreneur. I am the co-founder of a nonprofit organization called Labhya, and we work on children's mental health and well-being and social emotional learning at scale in partnership with governments. So that's a little bit about me. I spent about a decade teaching teaching in low-income classrooms across India, and quickly realized that there was a big difference between me teaching and children actually learning. And to solve for that, I co-founded Labhya with my co-founders Vedant and Malika.
That is so cool. I just wanted to know a little bit more about what Labhya does currently, as well, and if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yes. So the problem that we identified was that in schools, especially in classrooms in low-income communities, the focus has always been to enable children to, to be able to read and write and learn properly, which is, of course, extremely, extremely important. But the realities from where many of our children come from are not accommodated in their learning environment. So a lot of our children experience difficulties at home or in their communities, or sometimes even violence and trauma. But in the school environment, there was no such dedicated space for them to be able to build the skills to cope with these realities, and hence, be more present, more regulated to be able to learn. So they were too stressed to learn, in summary. And when we sort of dug deeper into this, we saw that there was a scope to work with more than 190 million children who are currently enrolled in public schools across India. And so that's kind of where we realized that there was the need to work with governments to work on children's mental health, well-being, and social emotional learning. And what Labhya does is we partner with state governments in India to help them institutionalize social emotional learning programs across all government schools of the state. So just like our children have a math, science, or English class, they now have a daily well-being class facilitated by school teachers who teach our children how to become more resilient, how to build better relationship skills, how to feel more motivated to learn.
That is so cool. And I think that, I mean, having worked in Delhi, we do know that they have a curriculum on happiness. And I have also spent some amount of time in government schools. So I think I feel like um, maybe even in government schools, a lot of teachers are not equipped with, okay, how do we really even create that safe space beyond books and textbooks? Like, how do we actually get to connect with children and make them feel safe enough? So that they are able to actually build the tools that they need to combat experiences and trauma that they are facing. And the fact that partnering with state governments and working with state schools, I think that's quite revolutionary, because I know that there are a lot of elite schools probably that do have this kind of opportunity for students. But it is great that all of our students get to be a part of such a class, irrespective of their school or context. So with that, I think that is a great segue to just introduce and talk a little bit about our educator dialogues today. We have a lot of counselors, administrators, and educators join us here. So we are going to be talking about the relevance of socio-emotional learning, and we're going to also talk a little bit about resilience today, and just like critically sort of look at that word and what does that mean. And Especially in a post pandemic era, right? Like, I think high schoolers have to navigate a lot of obviously academic rigor that is coming up now that we know the learning gap that was caused and how that must be, mitigated. There's also a lot of social and personal, interpersonal skills that that are kind of hard to navigate for students, given that a lot of children have not spent very developmental years in school with teachers, with their students, doing things that kids should be doing in school. So this webinar basically aims to provide some actionable insights on building resilience, building capacity, through social emotional learning interventions, what they might look like, how easy or hard is it to really implement it, and what role technology can probably play in our classrooms to enable this, while we draw insights from Richa's vast, experience, just building Labhya from ground up. Um, so I think that another big relevance of talking about this is also that NEP 2020 emphasizes on mental health and holistic development. And I think that we talk a lot about holistic development. But in today's um, webinar, we might look at it as, okay, what does it really mean to care for students' mind and soul and hearts? What does that look like? So I'm really excited to take this forward with you. So I we got to know a little bit about Labhya's work, and just drawing from that, uh, what how do you look at the term resilience? How important is it or not important is it for high schoolers or students, or and how should educators think about resilience today in a post-pandemic era?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that overview. And I hope that anyone listening in today finds value in the discussion and from our learnings. So I think when it comes to emotional resilience, we look at it at Labhya and all the research we've done working with almost 2.4 million children now for over 7 years. Um, is it's really interconnected between three things, right? One is resilience, like you mentioned. The second is relationship skills, and the third is learning motivation. And actually, at the intersection of these three is where, we see children really try be able to build the skills that they need to cope with adversities, to cope with challenges, whether it's stressors of everyday life or something that's going on at home, or a long-term stress that has sort of been, bothering them. And if nothing, it prepares them with a toolkit in their minds, which then helps them, which will kick in at some point in life whenever they need, emotional assistance, or whenever they come across a challenge that they haven't come across yet. So resilience, in that sense, plays a very big part in the work that we do. And in general, for children's context, most of the children that we work with are underserved and come from different and difficult backgrounds. And interestingly, they are already resilient in their own ways, right? Because they are showing up to school no matter what. Many of our children are so independent. They're giving each other haircuts in the villages, and they're washing each other's clothes, they're taking care of their siblings, and they're cooking, and they're coming to school, right? So it's I think in some ways we need to make them feel more like children in the classroom, and in that sense, that is resilience for them, because they're always weighed down by so many of the responsibilities that usually adults take care of. And so it looks different in different contexts, but it's extremely important for children to learn that when there is an obstacle in life, there is a way to get around it. And beyond physical solutions to problems, there is a mental mindset that we need to have, that tells us, keeps on telling us that no matter what, this will get through, this too shall pass. So it's extremely important. A lot of the research that we have done so far suggests that children who have strong relationships actually prove to be the most resilient, because they have people to depend on in difficult times.
That is so profound. And I think that I read a research paper on parent and child play. Um, and that also talked about relationships in the lines that you were saying, and how nurture plays such a very, very big role in really defining life trajectories for human beings. Um, yeah, another thing that I think about is we already have very uh, dire numbers for dropouts in India, right? Like we know that there is consistently, for diverse reasons across, elementary, middle, and high school, we have high dropouts in our country. And a big reason for that is also, the academics, right? And how it shifts and transforms and evolves. And a lot of times, children probably are not able to learn at their own pace for whatever school setting or whatever limitations there might be. And especially from ninth and 10th to 11th and 12th, this becomes, I've seen children really uh, think overthink a lot about, okay, what is our future really going to look like? I mean, now if I think about the cutoffs, for example, at DU, it's mind boggling, honestly. It's like 99, 100%. And it's like, what does it mean to be excel in something even? And I have often seen children's resilience or self-esteem or just belief or certain sort of existentialism kind of hitting them about what all of this seems really futile, because there is so little opportunity and there are so many of us and all of us are so good actually. So in this case, how would you like look at emotional resilience, especially for children who are making that transition from 10th to 11th, 12th grade? And what are some like drops of wisdom or yeah, advice that you have for educators and school counselors and administrators?
Yes, absolutely. And this is a really important conversation. Like you said, it's very top of mind, and the pressure is only increasing. And I think the way that social media and the way that general like mainstream media is also positioned, it does seem to young people, especially those in high school, that if I don't get this, then there is no other option, or only the top 1% get to do this and the rest of the people don't get the best careers. And I think the first thing to um, point out to our children constantly in education settings, through teachers, through school administrators, through parents, is that there is space for everyone in the world to be excellent, right? And that is something that we teach our kids as well, that although the world seems to be telling you that this is a mountain and there is not space for a lot of people at the peak, but in true form of life, every peak belongs there's one peak that belongs to everybody, right? And and the statistics there prove themselves, right? So of course there are only a few people who get through the top universities in India and abroad, etc., and there's a percentage that get admitted. But in general life, those who have strong relationships, people who build their skills, people who invest in their own learning, who are well intentioned, they always are more successful, yeah, right? And then also statistically, when you look at the top management of all the biggest companies in the world, the one thing that differentiates people from the CXOs and the senior leadership is their mindset. It's actually because at some point, all of us will have the same kinds of degrees, the same years of experience, the same professional backgrounds, but it is the way that we are, the vision that we have, and the kind of entrepreneurship spirit that we have that defines who leads the organizations ultimately. And so I think while there is a perspective that, there is a pie and it is small and everyone needs a piece of it, the other perspective to keep in mind is that there is space for everyone. And the most untapped space is careers where folks need self-awareness to excel, right? Because sometimes we get into this race of just doing what is right in terms of career, this degree, this college, etc. But ultimately, what pays off is us really investing in our own skill sets, in our own learning, in our social networks, and ultimately that, it really seeks out. A concrete example I can give you is that of my co-founder, Vedans. He went to school. He came from a really difficult background, a home background, and basically he couldn't go to college because he didn't score well, and also his family couldn't afford for him to go to a private school, and so he dropped out of, like, he basically decided to not go to college. He decided to pitch himself to startups. He found a mentor who bet on him, and the mentor then coached him on everything from writing emails at age 16 to coding to, by the time that he exited the company, he was one of the top officials. He was leading teams in the three digits. He was leading expansion in international countries. And so I think that's one of the most important stories to remember, that he has always taken the road less taken. And it has paid off because he invested in his own skills. He found mentors who trusted them, and he built an environment around him that helped him succeed.
Uh, I was actually taking down so many notes of what you were saying, and one thing that really also stood out to me is when you talked about how mindset actually sets people apart. And that is something that a lot of times in the hustle and bustle of running a classroom ops, which is very difficult anyway, having taught in classrooms for 2 straight years. I think we both can like testify that it is one of the hardest operations to run. But and a lot of times I think we miss out on coaching for these things. Another thing that I noticed when I was a program manager or school leader was also how oftentimes as educators we say that we will value things like collaboration or curiosity, courage, but we don't really measure them or talk about them in the classroom or really be able to show what that looks like in action. And I think that I hope that that is a takeaway everybody in the audience is also having, that mindset is something as valuable and important to be talked about and coached for. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and ask you this, right? Like, how can parents and educators like recognize signs of burnout or emotional distress in their children? What does that look differently at different ages? Or maybe even gender identities, like what cultures? Yeah, what is it that you can tell us about?
Yes, absolutely. That's a really important question, and in fact, there is not a lot of research in India, in India's context, on what that looks like and what are the localized factors that affect children's well-being, mental health, and so we're trying to spearhead that space and see, what works and what doesn't, and at what age, what gender, what socioeconomic status, what really shows up. Um, I think a couple of things that we have learned is, the first thing is very first thing, that all kinds of children, no matter whether they're introverts, extroverts, or younger, older adolescents, is the number one sign is usually social withdrawal. So not wanting to go out with friends, or not wanting to talk to anybody, and wanting to be alone in their own room and stuff like that. And so I think those are the very first signs, like fear of talking to people, or fear of going to school. So I think those are one of the very first signs of distress for children. And so parents and educators both should kind of try to look out for that, and recognize them, and try to talk to children about what is happening and why they feel that way. The second thing that I would like to highlight is that oftentimes mental distress and emotional distress in children comes across as laziness, procrastination, and lethargy. And these are the things that most adults hold children accountable for in the wrong ways, right? Because we think, oh, they just don't want to study, or it's just an excuse to not do the work. But really, all kinds of science, and the psychological science proves that all of these criterion are usually signs of children just being fearful, or them not feeling good about doing something, or being anxious. And a lot of these physical things can tell us the indicators of emotional distress. A lot of times, stomach ache before going to school, feeling nauseous, not wanting to go, or delaying going to school, getting ready. All of those things can also be a part of these really important indicators for burnout and distress amongst children. And the last thing I want to say is that for each age, this looks differently, right? For smaller children, it will be more sensory, like they would seek more sensory holds. They would want to just hug somebody, or they would want to touch something. And if they are deprived of that, it doesn't help. Whereas for older children, maybe they need just more time with friends, and they need more social skills. They need, time away from home in the playground and stuff like that. So for each age, this looks differently. And also for each kind of temperament, oftentimes the most obedient children, the quieter children, the children who don't make a noise or don't question anything are assumed to be all right, but they are struggling as well sometimes. And it's just that no one asks them. And so if you have a child in your classroom who's always obedient, who's always saying yes to everything, chances are that they're just scared to say no, and they need a space for themselves as well. So I think those would be a couple of thoughts that we've learned from being in the space.
That was very, very insightful. I think that I could, as a teacher, also relate so many times. The kind of sort of things that we see in class, or that we probably cannot understand, because like you said, these are some parameters that teachers or parents would hold their children accountable for. And I think it is time to kind of go a little bit deeper and kind of figure out what is going on with the student or your child. So Richa, how might parents or educators, once they have recognized signs, how might they go about it? Because a lot of times I feel like when I used to talk to the teachers that I worked with or parents, um, I mean, parents are still, able to talk to their children and ask them directly. But teachers oftentimes feel that maybe they don't have the correct training, the even equipment or tool to be able to, bring up or open loops that they cannot close, for example. So how might then they provide emotional support, knowing that they are not professionals? And how do they navigate that space as an adult?
Yes, absolutely. So this is something that when we create spaces for capacity building with our teachers, we do mention every time that you may not feel that way, but you are a safe space for most of the children that you teach, and they do look up to you and they trust you, and which is why they're showing up every day. So each child has a teacher in mind, where they know, oh, if something bad happens in school, if something somebody says something, or if I feel uncomfortable, if I'm not feeling well, I can go to this teacher, right? So you are top of mind for some students, like most students. And even though you may feel like they're troubling you, or they only look at you as a person in authority, that's not the case. They do trust you. I think the gap that we need to fill is the teachers' trust in children as well, because it's difficult to be an educator and be in a classroom of 40, 50, and have a safe space for every single child, right? And then on top of that, teachers are so overburdened with all kinds of administrative tasks that even if they want to spend time with children, by the time they are done, the school ki ghanti has gone, and everybody has left, gone back home. So I think a lot of this has to do with the long-term process. Of course, once we know that a child is struggling, there are measures to be taken. But the most important thing is to know that overall, a child should be able to know that you are there for them in the long run, even when things are good. Because it's not easy for children to trust an adult suddenly when already things are crashing down, right? So having a safe space, just 2 3 minutes of mindfulness, and at the beginning and end of the day, few words of affirmations when a child has done well, or even when they have not done well. I think those small things really create a safe space for children, so that when they are struggling or when they've made a mistake, they can come to you. Listening to children in a non-judgmental way is extremely important, and remembering is also important. So if a child has told you something, making a note of it somewhere, just so that next time you can ask them, oh, by the way, what happened about that match of yours? What happened? Is your sister okay now? I think that really helps. And these micro practices are not extremely, you don't have to make charts or trackers, or, do something really big, but these small practices really build a lot of trust between teachers and students, so that when things are not so great, they are able to come up to us, and we are able to guide them. And lastly, I think educators, especially, in our context, we are always looking at them as solution providers. If COVID has happened, then they are tracking the children, they are giving out the ration. If elections are happening, they are the ones manning the booth. But sometimes teachers don't have to provide solutions. That's okay too, right? So they can just be a safe space, and they can figure out ways together with the children. And more, sometimes children don't need solutions, they just need someone to listen to them. They have enough adults in their lives who are trying to solve for them. So I think knowing that, just having knowing that it's a sprint, not it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, that long-term relationships will pay off. Time and investment in that is important. And I think just building strong relationships with parents as well, beyond academic success. I remember that when I was in school, I had a teacher, most of the teachers would, give the progress report and talk about the marks. And the standard line would be, she has a lot of potential, she needs to push herself. And then there would be one teacher who would just like say good things about me and say, you should encourage her to talk. She's really good at this and that. And I know, and she would notice things about me that I never thought anybody else was even looking at. So I think just that once in 6 months meeting with my parents, and my parents also built that relationship with her. I think it was a really safe space for me to have growing up.
Um, I think that I loved when you said that, how teachers are always looked at like they have to provide solutions. And that's not just by students. I mean, that's by every single person, every single stakeholder that is visiting the school or is in the school. And I'm thinking about when you talked about micro practices, I just thought about how important is it to reflect as educators or administrators on the culture of care. What does that really look like in school? So obviously we do know that culture, school culture, and classroom culture plays a very, very big role in ensuring that kids are able to feel safe, as well as develop meaningful relationships with their peers. And that meaningful relationship also includes conflict and conflict resolution. Um, but at the same time, like, what does a culture of care still look like as a school or as a classroom? Building on that, how easily, I mean, how hard is it to, as an educator, incorporate um, this culture of care or these micro practices or SEL in their classroom, um, alongside alongside the academics? And I'm asking you this because you are a pro at it. You have done that in some of the most difficult, challenging sort of landscapes. But I think a lot of us educators are who are here today, we do have access and resources, and we're just hoping if you can help us understand how we can make the most of it and bring that alive in the classroom for our students. And how easy or hard is it to balance it with the academic pressure?
Yes. So I think two things that are really important for us when we do this work, to make sure that teachers are, at the forefront of this, and they're also not being burdened to do the work all by themselves, is two. So one is, when we partner with our state government partners, all of the programs that we work towards, we ensure that there is a dedicated time for that in the school timetable, right? So, in some cases, mostly that looks like a daily 30-minute class, or it looks like 15 minutes in the assembly. So it could really differ, but there has to be a dedicated time for something like this, so that the teacher is not burdened to teach academically and then find extra time or cut down on their academic teaching to do something like this, and otherwise it always continues to get deprioritized. So that's the first thing, to make sure that there is space for teachers to even do something like this, even if it's 2 3 minutes at the beginning of the day. um, The second, and this has to be mandated, because then then it becomes something that is institutionalized and teachers can plan for it, the school administration can plan for it. It doesn't involve too much effort from the teacher side. The second is alignment of all the stakeholders within the school management, right? So the school administrators, the head of the schools, and the teachers, all on this being on the same page about this being a priority. Teachers being open to experimenting with small practices like these, and school administrators building that same space that teachers build with children with their teachers, right? So that's extremely important. For teachers, their own well-being is also important. If teachers cannot be well themselves, how will they teach well-being to children? So heads of schools creating those safe spaces for teachers. In fact, in our trainings, almost a third of our teacher trainings across all the states focus on teacher well-being and teacher feedback. And then we sort of go on to teacher capacity building. And hopefully, those spaces ensure that teachers themselves have that community for themselves, the way they're wanting to build the same for children.
And just thinking about high schoolers as well, and I'm thinking one particular question comes to my mind is like, how might um, social emotional learning help them navigate social media and like digital spaces more positively? I think that there is so much media that they consume, so much news, true or false, either way, a very shocking picture into the world of adults, which is and I think that they are oftentimes overexposed to a lot of information. I might be being a little prudish here, so feel free to like correct me. But how do you think those lessons might help them navigate their digital presence personality more effectively? Do you see that as a problem, or do you see that as something that you have had to deal with when you are thinking about SEL, or not?
Yes, so there's two reasons why social media overexposure is a problem, right? The first is, of course, that the media itself, the kind of content that children consume, all of that is too much for children. The colors, the content, the language, the kind of hate sometimes, all of that is largely inappropriate for children to consume, and especially at the scale at which it is consumed, the number of hours we end up spending on our phones, not just kids, actually, even adults. And secondly, even developmentally, I think recently there was this big study that came out that exposure to screens, just screens in general, is developmentally detrimental for children, right? So even if you're I mean, basically, if you're watching anything these days as a child, it is slowing your brain down. And so, in both cases, it's extremely important for us to address this. And in the context that we work with, especially in the urban areas, this overexposure is largely unregulated by adults, right? So nobody knows what children are seeing on social media, etc. And beyond the fact that it's inappropriate, um, children don't have the skills right now to differentiate, like you said, Subhashi, between facts and opinions, or fake news, or lives of people that are not actually that way, that are shown to be or demonstrated in certain ways, right? And it can lead to a lot of self-esteem issues. So I think bringing me back to actually what kind of skills we need to build in children in today's context, especially, is resilience, relationship skills, and learning motivation, right? When you have strong relationships around you, you can ground yourself in that reality. But when you are isolated, you ground yourself in the reality that you're seeing on social media, which is not true. When you have friends, when you have strong adults who care for you, who trust you, then you don't feel insecure about the lives that you see online. And while we may not be able to regulate so much the exposure that children have on social media, but we can build the skills that they need, to differentiate, to critically think about different issues and things that are happening, and to maybe even use social media as a place to build change, right? Or change the narrative or be more real. So I think that is really important. Having a strong social ecosystem in person can really ground a child and a high schooler in their current reality versus having them compare their lifestyles with somebody online who might as well, be lying about the whole thing. Um, and secondly, building the skills to understand, okay, this is fake news, this is not true, this is how the influencer network works, this is AI, or this is something that's not a good piece of information that is not coming from a credible source. So I think a balance of social networks and skill can ensure this. Unfortunately, with high schoolers, even when I was in high school, I didn't have a phone back then, but I used to use my father's laptop and my mother's phone. And the one thing that would constantly be there is, okay, now you won't use it, and that actually doesn't help because in ages 13 onwards is when we build our identity. The I starts to develop developmentally in our brains, right? And our prefrontal cortex is starting to develop. And so the more you push us to do things that we want to do, the more the rebellion will happen. And the more you tell us the reason why, the more we might actually understand. And so the why behind not using a phone or regulating phone usage or internet exposure is more important than actually stopping young people from, or taking away their phones and saying, no, now you will not use it.
And when you bring out that example, it reminds me of this little ad that I saw a very long time ago, where this parent was telling the child that he should not be spending so much time online, while constantly being on the laptop working. Now we do understand, like, in this economy, how things work, but I'm wondering, what do you think is the role of modeling out what they are expecting from young people as an adult who's responsible for young people, and how easy or hard is it to really do that? Because clearly we have a whole different life and perspective from them, but they are also very closely intertwined to ours. So how might we, like, succeed in this balancing act?
Yes, that is definitely the question of the hour. In fact, this week, now sharing with you on phone call before this, my co-founder welcomed her first baby, and this is also Labhya's, one of the first babies. And um, that's been a question for us because we run like a startup. We work 24/7, and now things will change for her. So we've been talking about how that would look like. And of course she's on leave, but the brainstorming has continued. And I think one of the things that we've learned from parents around us, parents of the children that we serve, is modeling really helps, and sort of telling the why also helps. So for many of our parents, actually, that we don't work directly with parents, but when we talk to them about children and the program and the impact they've had, is the primary highlight is that, oh, now when I spend time with children, I have something to talk about to them. I ask them how is the well-being class. We practice mindfulness together. We talk about the story that happened in the classroom. We talk about the activity that happened. And so the first sort of linkage is, when we are spending time with children screen free, what is the quality of the conversation we are having there? How are we anchoring that? Is it just about, okay, how was school, how many marks, what's happening, or is it really to build a deeper relationship with children, to have difficult conversations, for example, about race or gender or politics and stuff like that? And the second is to really, help the children and ourselves also differentiate between what's work screen time and our own scrolling screen time. So if we're working on a laptop, can we make sure that children know that this is for work? But then when we are not working, then we don't look at screens. We know parents whose children are in high school now, and they don't have TVs in their houses, and they only use phones at a particular time, of course, when they're working. And so it is possible, but I think privilege and regulation has to do a lot with this conversation also. And so the one thing that we have learned is no matter what you are doing on your screen, and no matter how hypocritical it may sound, but actually just spending meaningful time, 10 to 20 minutes, 30 minutes every day, with your child screen free, can be more impactful than debating with them about using their screens or not.
That is so again so very insightful. I mean, I'm thinking about um, quality versus quantity also. I mean, quantity is important, but what are the conversations that we are having with our children, and what is it mostly about? And I'm drawing a little bit from my own experience, and I feel like most of the conversations and it's different with different sets of parents also. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about that. But I think with my mother, it was more to do about, of course, she knew everything about me and what I was doing in school. So we could actually talk about some other things, like, what I was feeling about, a certain experience that I had, or a book that I read, or how my thoughts about things are changing. Versus my father, it was more transactional. Like, it wasn't, at least it wasn't like emotional or to do with like who I am becoming as a parent, as a child. Um, and yeah, I think that was pretty interesting. Of course, there's a lot of trust in both my mom and dad, but how we developed our relationships are very, very different.
Yes, that's really important actually. And one of the primary things, if you read about parenting and psychology, for raising children, etc., is that both parents being on the same page has a lot to do with children's success in life, and also just general brain development. Because like you said, I mean, we all kind of grew up in a very similar environment as yours, right, where we had separate relationships. If somebody says no, you can try to manipulate the other one, and they'll say no, no, go talk to papa, go talk to mama. So I think, but the science says that when parents are one team, then it's really helpful for the child to know, because it becomes predictable for them, right? They know what to expect. They know that they have the same relationship. They may have different types of relationships with either of the parents, but they know that the parents are decisive about certain values that they will practice in the household and life. And it really helps the child develop their own value system. And so it's a very big factor. And thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And before we close, because we have only 10 minutes left, I would just like to say, if any of you in the audience have any questions, please feel free to put them on the Q&A box or write to us in the chat box, and we will be happy to take them up. Um, but Richa, I have known about you and your career for some time, and I have admired the work that you do. And so I'm very excited that I get to talk to you one on one today. And I wanted to know, what is the most like transformative lesson that you have learned about socio emotional learning, about resilience, about in children, in your journey.
And there's many lessons that we continue to learn, and many mistakes and failures that we continue to experience. But I think the top two so far have been, one has been that localized contextual solutions for children's well-being are extremely important. This is not a one size fits all kind of intervention that will help children. So even though we work at scale, but for example, in each of our states, we create a localized in the local language, a very, very contextual curriculum that then is co-created with teachers and implemented by teachers. So knowing that things are coming from children's day-to-day experiences, even the names of the characters in the stories, or the or names of the fruits and the locations, all of that really matters when children are able to relate the skills to themselves. Um, And secondly, what gets measured gets done. So that's really important to us. So while we don't pressure our teachers to evaluate children on SEL, not at all, but we do run our own evaluations on what was the impact of our work, what are the outcomes that we are reaching, how far along are our children when it comes to building grit or reducing anxiety, or signs of mental health or mental illnesses. So I think those are the two major learnings that we've had in the last couple of years.
I mean, I'm already so curious to know what that framework might even look like, because these are um, very qualitative, perhaps data that is being, you know, uh, given a number to, and yeah, it's making me very very curious to really see how Labhya really looks at outcomes when it comes to SEL, and thinking about that. Going back to the vision board, as founders and co-founders, I think being in that room would also have been really, really interesting. Um, all right, and I think, let me see if we have any questions. None. Um, okay, I think that we are at the end of our webinar. I'm going to take a very quick minute to thank everyone who is present here for joining us, taking out the time on a Saturday to listen to us talk about resilience and social emotional learning. And I think that I've made so many notes of what Richa has said, and I'm going to try to put them in a post and have it on our social media archive forever. There are many things and drops of wisdom that our entire community can actually benefit from, because we reach out, we work with a lot of educators, school administrators, principals, and of course, students. And by extension, parents also keep an eye on us, therefore. But thank you so much, Richa, for joining us today. And I hope that we get the opportunity to do this again. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Subhashi, and thank you for everyone for tuning in. If there's anything else that I could support with, I'd be happy to. And just really grateful for all the wonderful work that you're doing. Please keep it up and count us in as allies. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye bye. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye. Thanks, Subhashi. Bye bye.
Bye.